The first year you have more money than your whole family combined is the year you learn none of them were ever talking about money at all. They were talking about you. I want to tell you about a man named Dorian because his story is the cleanest example I've ever seen of a concept most people don't learn until it costs them something. The difference between what economists call a stock and a flow. Income is a flow. Net worth is a stock, and almost everyone in Dorian's family, including Dorian for a while, confused the two. That confusion is what nearly ended his relationship with his own sister. Here's where it starts. Dorian sold his half of a commercial cleaning contract business, 9 years of unglamorous work, payroll on Fridays, bidding on office buildings nobody else wanted, for just under $2 million. Not from a check with someone's name in cursive at the bottom, from a wire on a Thursday afternoon while he was standing in a parking lot outside a Home Depot buying weather stripping for his garage door. He didn't tell anyone. He drove home, fixed the garage door, and made dinner. 2 days later, his sister called him and opened with, "So, when's the party?" He hadn't told her. He hadn't told anyone. The deal wasn't even public. It was 2 LLCs and a law firm, none of whom had her number. And that's the first thing I want you to sit with, because it's the part nobody explains about money. It doesn't leak through documents. It leaks through people. Somebody's cousin works at the bank. Somebody's friend does title searches. Money finds its way into rooms before you've decided who's allowed to know. So now the clock is running before Dorian's even decided how he wants to live in this new number. His sister, Priya, was the one who'd always been steady. Not rich, not struggling, steady. 2 kids, a mortgage she was ahead on, a job at a school district she complained about but never quit. She was, if you'd asked anyone in the family, the responsible one. Dorian was the one who took the risk. Everyone else placed their bets on Priya's caution and quietly assumed Dorian's swing would eventually fail. It didn't, and that's the part that broke something nobody saw coming. 3 weeks after the wire cleared, Priya starts talking differently, not asking for anything, worse than that in a way. She starts narrating her own restraint out loud in front of him. I mean, we're fine, we don't need anything fancy. Nobody said she needed anything. She's answering a question no one asked, which means she's asking herself one on a loop every time she sees him.
This is the first psychological hook of the story, and it's one you'll recognize instantly once I name it. Relative deprivation. Priya's income hadn't changed by a single dollar, but her sense of her own financial position had collapsed overnight. Because financial well-being isn't measured in absolute terms. It's measured against the nearest comparison point. Her nearest comparison point used to be her coworkers. Now it was her brother. And against that new ruler, steady and responsible suddenly measured as small. Dorian didn't do anything to cause that. That's what makes this so uncomfortable to talk about. He just existed, differently, in a room she was still standing in. The real test comes at her son's 8th birthday party. Bounce house in the backyard, a folding table of gas station quality pizza, 30 kids screaming about nothing. Dorian's having a good time, genuinely, the first easy afternoon he's had in a month, when Priya's husband, a decent guy named Callum, who Dorian's always liked, sidles up with 2 beers and says, half laughing, "So are we still doing Cancun next year, or is that beneath you now?" It's a joke. Everyone laughs, including Dorian. But watch what a joke like that is actually doing. It's a pressure test disguised as humor, a way of asking, are you going to start paying for things now, without anyone having to be brave enough to ask it? Dorian laughs it off, says something about the bounce house guy overcharging them. The moment passes. But across the yard, he catches Priya not laughing, watching him not offer. That's the moment the story turns, because here's what Dorian doesn't know yet. Priya isn't hoping for a handout, she's hoping for an equal. And every time he doesn't offer, in her mind, he's confirming that the math between them has changed, that he now sees himself as a different category of person than her. He thinks he's being respectful by not making assumptions about her finances. She's experiencing his restraint as a verdict. This is the part of wealth nobody prepares you for. You can be completely correct. Dorian genuinely believed offering to pay for things would be condescending, and still be wrong about what the other person needed from you. Money doesn't just move numbers, it moves meaning. And when you go quiet about money out of respect, the people around you often fill that silence with the worst possible interpretation. 6 weeks later, Priya calls him with a proposal, not a loan, an investment, her words. Callum's cousin is opening a mobile detailing franchise, $40,000 buy-in, projected to be cash flowing within 4 months, easy. She frames it exactly the way Dorian once framed his own cleaning business to skeptical relatives 9 years ago, and that parallel is not an accident. It's the trap. She's not just asking for money, she's asking to be believed the way nobody believed him back when he was the one asking. And here's where the story could go the easy, expected way. Brother says no, family fractures, everyone learns a lesson about boundaries. But Dorian says yes, not because the numbers convinced him, because he remembers exactly what it felt like to be underestimated, and he doesn't want to be the reason his sister feels that too.
For a while, it looks like the story where money heals things. Priya sends photos of the detailing van getting wrapped. She calls him partner in front of her kids. There's a Sunday where she drives over unannounced with coffee and helps him pressure wash his driveway, laughing the whole time about nothing in particular. And for that one afternoon, Dorian believes the $40,000 bought back something more valuable than the number itself. Then the van's transmission goes. Then the franchise fee turns out to have excluded insurance, which nobody read closely. Then Callum's cousin stops answering calls, and what was supposed to cash flow within 4 months instead needs another $18,000 just to keep existing. Priya doesn't call to apologize. She calls with a plan for the $18,000, and this is the line that tells you everything about how this went sideways. You can't pull out now, that just means the first 40's gone for nothing. That single sentence is the sound of the sunk cost fallacy, one of the most expensive ideas in all of personal finance, dressed up as loyalty. The money that's already spent isn't a reason to spend more. It's already gone either way. The only real question is whether the next $18,000, evaluated completely on its own, is a good bet. It wasn't. But framed as finishing what we started, it sounds like family. Framed correctly, it's just a worse bet wearing a better costume. Dorian says no, his first real no to her ever, and the silence that follows is louder than any argument would have been. 2 days later, his mother calls, and she opens with a sentence that tells him exactly who reached her first. Your sister has done nothing but give to this family her whole life, and now that she needs something back, this is where you land? Notice what that sentence does. It doesn't argue the investment was sound. It doesn't need to. It reclassifies the entire relationship into a ledger Dorian never agreed to keep. Years of imagined debt, suddenly due all at once, the moment he had the means to pay it. He almost caves, not because the plan makes sense, because the alternative is being the villain in a story everyone else has already agreed to tell about him. Thanksgiving is where it surfaces at the table, in front of everyone. Priya's had 2 glasses of wine, and Dorian's just answered a normal question about his new place when she sets her fork down and says, quiet enough that it lands harder than shouting would have, "You used to be the one who understood what it's like to bet on yourself. Guess that's easier to remember than to actually do for someone else." Nobody defends him. Not because they agree with her, because agreeing with him out loud at that table costs something none of them are willing to pay. He goes home early, and for about 3 weeks he actually believes she might be right, that being careful with money, even money he earned, makes him smaller than the version of himself who once needed someone to bet on him.
Then his father, who hasn't said one word about any of this the entire time, shows up on a random Tuesday with no reason at all, doesn't mention the money, doesn't mention Priya, just sits at Dorian's kitchen table for an hour, tells a long, pointless story about a coworker from 30 years ago, finishes his coffee, rinses the mug, and leaves. It's such a small thing that Dorian almost misses what it actually is. 3 weeks after that, his father ends up in the hospital. Nothing catastrophic, a cardiac scare that resolves, but enough of a scare that the whole family shows up in the same waiting room at midnight, including Priya.
And in a hallway that doesn't have room in it for anything except two people who are scared, the entire year between them just stops mattering. No mention of the 40,000, no mention of the table, just a hand on a shoulder. While they're waiting, their father tells Dorian something he's never told anyone. 22 years ago, his own younger brother, Dorian's uncle, a name that stopped coming up at holidays before Dorian was old enough to ask why, borrowed money from him and lost it in a bad investment, and instead of ever asking for it back, their father just quietly wrote it off and let the relationship go cold rather than let a debt sit between them at every dinner for the rest of their lives. "I watched money turn my brother into a stranger," he says. "I wasn't going to let it do that to you two. So when your sister asked me for advice about it, I told her the only thing that ever mattered. It's not what he gives you, it's how you treat him after he says no." That's the twist Dorian didn't see coming. His father had been the quiet check on this whole thing the entire time, not by taking sides, but by refusing to let either of his kids turn a financial decision into a referendum on love.
Nothing gets fixed overnight. Priya doesn't pay back the 40,000, and Dorian doesn't expect her to. He'd already priced that in as the cost of an answer he needed about who she was under pressure. His mother never quite apologizes for the phone call, but something does change. 6 months later, Priya asks him to look over her retirement contributions. Actual numbers, actual spreadsheet, no emotional framing at all. And it's the first completely honest financial conversation they've ever had. She'd been under-contributing for years, missing her full employer match, which is, dollar for dollar, the highest guaranteed return most people will ever be offered in their lives. And nobody had ever just sat down and shown her that in plain numbers, instead of a pitch. That's the real reframe here, and it's the thing I want you to walk away with today. Money doesn't damage families. Unexamined assumptions about what money means do. Every conflict in Dorian's story, the joke at the birthday party, the investment, the sunk cost, the phone call from his mother, came from someone treating money as a stand-in for love, loyalty, or fairness, instead of what it actually is, a tool with rules that don't bend for feelings, no matter how much we wish they would. The families that survive sudden wealth aren't the ones who avoid conflict. They're the ones who eventually learn to talk about the money as money and the love as love, and stop asking one to prove the other. If you've ever watched people around you change the moment your circumstances did, you already know how lonely that can feel. I make videos exactly for that gap, where money and family collide and nobody's handed you the rules in advance. If that's useful to you, stay around for the next one.